Good morning, everyone. Welcome to my lecture on the subject Classical and Modern Literature. So this is our first lecture, which is dedicated to have a general knowledge about the periods in English literature. And also in this lecture, you'll have a knowledge about Anglo-Saxon literature also. Before getting down to our lecture, I would like to give you general information about the term literature.
Literature is the study of human communication. It deals, of course, with great writers, from Shakespeare to Cervantes, Jane Austen to James Joyce. And it deals with texts, Greek plays, romantic poems, Gothic novels set in gloomy castles. But it's also about more than that. Literature offers access to vibrant forms of expression and asks us to embrace new ways of thinking about the world. It shows us how to read critically, even asking why we read and write at all. Above all, it explores how we communicate ideas and why. So for a student of literature, all forms of communication are considered texts.
So generally we can say that the definition of literature is literature is a term used to describe written and sometimes spoken material, and this term derived from the Latin word literature, meaning writing formed with letters. Literature most commonly refers to works of the creative imagination, including poetry, drama, fiction, non-fiction, and in some instances, journalism and song. Also, literature represents the culture and tradition of a language or people. The concept is difficult to precisely define, so many have tried. It's clear that the accepted definition of literature is constantly changing and evolving. The importance of literature. Reading and studying literature is very important for various reasons. Some of these outlined below. So we can say that literature improves your command of language. And also it teaches you about the life, cultures and experiences of people in other parts of the world. It gives you information about other parts of the world in which you may never be able to visit. And also it entertains us and provides useful occupation in our free time. It makes us a wiser and more experienced person by forcing to judge, sympathize with or criticize the characters that we read about. And also it helps us compare our own experiences with the experiences of other people. And to the question of the interrelation of literature with other subjects, we can say that literature can give information which may be useful in geography, in science, in history, in social studies, and so on. So the next topic that we are going to discuss is about major literary periods, which is an overview of the texts that have shaped in English literature. Based on the text, we can contextualize that by placing it in the appropriate literary period. We understand where it fits within the whole English canon and the development of English writing. So I can argue that there are two major forces that shape the thinking in literary series throughout the ages. On the one hand, down the bottom of the page, you can see the words nature and beauty. which has a real strong values during the classical era and predominantly during the Renaissance and the Romantic era of the 1800s. And at the top of the page you can have the words reason, logic, structure, objectivity, and science. These are the approaches to writing and to literature, which is much more prominent in particular than near classicist, Enlightenment thinking, but also in modernism and to some extent in the Victorian medieval period. We will see those forces pulling one way or the other in most literary periods. Obviously, when we come to the end here and postmodernism, you will see that the thinking has kind of been turned on its head. No one really knows what is up or down or right or wrong. Okay, let's start by examining the classical writing from the ancient period. So there is a writing from as early as 2600 before Christ. Mostly these writings are Egyptian. It is called papyrus writing and is maybe not what we could call a literary name, but more historical and documentary. And the next one is Gilgamesh epic. So it's from about 2000 before Christ, setting in what is today Iran, dealing with the adventure of King Gilgamesh. Why did I start with these two periods? Right now, here I would like to note that mostly the scientists of the world, they argue that the oral traditions takes its beginning from these periods. These are the oral traditions of hero stories or people who are gods or kings or combinations thereof, and we see in the Iliad and the Odyssey, and we see the exploits of Odysseus and of the kings and princes around Troy and Greece, and how they fight for power and to preserve their family or preserve their powers or preserve their sanity in some cases. These are some cases of definitely shaping the myths as part of this period. And these works have built the foundations for religious thinking in the writings of texts like the Bible and Torah, which are all coming out of this time period. So the main features of the classical period is the oral tradition, myths, fundamental religious texts, and often centered on royalty texts. So the next our period is about Old English or Anglo-Saxon period, which spans from 450 to 1066, and I would like to give you some information about this period. So the Old English period was marked by the influx of the Saxons and the Angles tribes invading Celtic England. The invasion extended to the conquest of England in 1066, which was led by William the Conqueror. The conquest was given birth by the Norman French under the leadership of William. The Anglo-Saxons were converted to Christianity in the 7th century, It was only after this transition that the Anglo-Saxons could shift to the development of written literature, apart from their literature being oral in nature. So Bede and Alcium were scholars who wrote manuscripts in Latin. It is through their writings that an influx of culture and advanced learning was brought into being. The Old English poets Cynewulf and Caedmon composed poems and verses on biblical and religious themes and highlighted the lives of saints and their doctrines. The poems of that time, The Wanderer, Dior, and the Seafarer, are some of the well-known poems that were phrased in Old English language. So now I would like you to listen to the Old English language and to compare the pronunciation system differences with the contemporary one.
Oft him an haga, ara jebideth. Metodus biltsa, theachthe him mocheri, yon lagulade longa shelde, preran me hondum, hrim chelde se.
So now listen to the language of the Dior.
Welan himba werman, rakas kannade, an hudi errol. Arvotha dreag, havde him to yesitha, sorga and longath, winter chada raka, wean oft on fond, sitan hinna neathard on nede leide, swonkra sauna benda on sulan mun.
So I played these poems of the Old English one in order to make you to understand the pronunciation differences of Old English. So in this, the line of the dates of periods, I would like to show you the naming differences. Historically, the period name of the Old English one is called Anglo-Saxon and Norman, but literary period name of this time is pre-Chaucerian period. So our next period of English literature spans from 1066 to 1500, and its historical name is Middle English period, but its literary name of that period is called as the Age of Chaucer. When the Middle English came into being, with its literary usage, the most extensive writing was conducted on the subjects associated with the religion. The second half of the 14th century saw the approach hooded by great authors like Chaucer. That's why we call it as the Age of Chaucer. The most influential and important works of this period, also referred to as the Anglo-Norman period, saw the revelation of works such as Lais and Guillaume de Lorris, composed by Marie de France. Further, I will show you, or I will try to demonstrate you, the language pronunciation differences of that period. Amongst the other notable literary contributions were Jean de Meun's Roman de la Rose in the segment of romances, Thomas Malory's Morte d'Arthur soars consistently as an author who contributed a valuable prose romance. In a nutshell, this age was coveted with the tag of being the most active with regards to producing religious songs and folk ballads, with miracle and morality plays serving to embellish this age in their own respective ways. I have taken one of the work that belongs to the Middle Age and try to notice the language pronunciation system of that period and try to notice what was the language of that time. As I have told you in my lecture, there were three main languages. In the medieval period, they are Middle English, Anglo-Norman or French, and Latin one. Okay, the next period in our list is the Renaissance period. When we are talking about the Renaissance period, we should have to take into account the ages. The first age is Elizabethan age, which spans from 1558 to 1603, and Jacobean age from 1603 to 1625, Caroline age from 1625 to 49, and Commonwealth period or Puritan interregnum age takes from 49 last till 1660. In literary, these periods were named as from Chaucer to Tottel's Miscellany, from 1400 to 1557, and the age of Shakespeare from 1557 to 1625, and the age of Milton from 1625 to 1660. Renaissance was an era that was marked by supplementary terms such as rebirth and revival, was replaced by a description called early modernism. This term is designated in order to delve on the present and the future rather than analyzing reminiscence. This age is known to have affected the later half of the Middle Ages. The age was here to create an impact on a world that lived in misconceptions and conceit, pretending to be fully aware of universal truths revolving around God, man, and nature. The truth was indeed not fully known, and innovation was yet to take wings in this age. The inventions and innovations that occurred are a testimony to the restless demeanor and curious audacity of an era where religious thinkers and scholars were actively participating. The new technology of printing took shape with ideas and discoveries playing host to authors and poets like Chaucer, who had his book Canterbury Tales published, a book of character or courtesy. The most famous amongst the category is Castiglione's Idyll, Milton's Paradise Lost, and Dante's Inferno were the coveted works that dealt with the imagination of the novel concept of cosmos. Shakespeare's Tempest is an account of new discoveries and voyages with the contemporary saga. Now about the ages of the Renaissance period. So the first one is the Elizabethan age. So this period of English literature has an established literary response which was marked by great composers such as Sir Edmund Spenser, Sir Philip Sidney, Shakespeare, Christopher Marlowe and Francis Bacon. This age was punctuated for its presence having felt in the field of dramatics and poetry, which lays its meaningful head in the lap of nature. Lyric and narrative poetry were the cornerstones of this era. The next age is Jacobean age, certainly the age of prose writing, and Donne and Bacon were Christianed as propellers of doctrines proposed by them. Shakespeare, with his tragedies and tragicomedies, made an impact with the other notable playwrights such as Chapman, Burton, Beaumont, and Fletcher. And the next one is Caroline Age. This was the time when John Milton, along with melancholy-centric writers Burton and Brownie, composed prose and plays. It was also an era where the religious poet George Herbert concentrated on poetry, on gallantry, courtship, and courtly love. The last age in the period of Renaissance is Puritan Common period, which is Puritan interregnum was an alternative term used for this era. The Commonwealth age saw writers like Cowley, Marvell, and Davenant. It was an age where Milton portrayed his prose in political subjects, and Hobbes distinguished his writing style in the form of political treatise called Leviathan. The next period in our list is Neoclassical, which starts from 1660 and lasts to 1785. Neoclassical period was an institution of poets where the light of knowledge acquisition with discipline and respect was given an overwhelming importance. With neoclassic poetry, the subjects had the elements nature as its background. The Restoration period marked an influx of theatre where William Wycherley and George Etheridge developed a genre of comedy of manners. The Country Wife, William Wycherley's play, centered around the nuances of bawdy language and semi-aristocratic flavor that delivered the eccentricities of characters with their names suggesting their counter-characters. Thus, the play is allegorical with a competentness of its own. The Augustus Age novelist and journalist Daniel Defoe and Lady Mary Wortley wrote poems with candor and conviction. And we should have to note that the neoclassical period is divided into three ages. The first one is the Restoration Age, that spans from 1660 till 1700. And from 1700 to 1745, it is called Augustan Age or Age of Pope. And from 1745 till 1785, the Age of Sensibility or the Age of Johnson. The next period is called a Romantic period that starts from 1785 and lasts till 1832. The Romantic period had its origins in spontaneity and quick wit. It was an age that laid stress on nature and deemed nature not as the background but the backbone of poetry. The Romantic period had experimentation and invention running through the veins of poetry. Poets like Keats, Shelley, Burns, William Blake, Coleridge, and Wordsworth made a significant and radical impact on the face of poetry. It was an era where universe and nature were considered in the forefront of all the human nitty-gritty as the background of poetry. Romanticism is characterized by its emphasis on emotion, the purity of childhood, the glorification of the past, and critique of progress, absolute truth, and the deification of nature. Glorification of the past and critique of progress, the cult of the Middle Ages, is a significant theme in Romanticism's revived elements of art and literature perceived as authentically medieval in an attempt to escape population growth, early urban sprawl, industrialism. The romanticist is on a ceaseless quest for absolute truth. As discussed, Romanticism was a movement away from the objective truths of science towards the most objective truths of art. The next, in literary, these periods were named as the Age of Johnson and the Age of Wordsworth. The next period in our list is the Victorian period, which starts from 1832 and lasts till 1901. The Victorian era is considered as the golden age of English novel. The Victorian period had melancholy and mourning as its cornerstones where poetry is concerned. This period was named by the name of the Queen Victoria because over the 6 decades of Queen Victoria's reign. During this time, over 60,000 works of prose fiction were published in Great Britain alone. The unprecedented growth of such kind of publishing was due in part to the spread of education, the emergence of the middle classes, and the proliferation of more affordable reading materials. As an increasing proportion of the population became literate, so too did the demand for new types of literature increase, a demand that was met by more than 7,000 authors of that time. Queen Victoria came to the throne during the world's first industrial revolution, a time characterized by rapid change and development. Key advances in communication methods and the growth of the railway network led to a boom in print production and distribution. Novelists like Charles Dickens, William Thackeray, and George Eliot serialized their works by publishing their novels in series of installments. Writers frequently ended each installment on cliffhanger, making the reader anxious for the next episode. During the reign of Queen Victoria, the city of London became a hub of literature. Dickens, whose stories still bring Victorian London to life, was immensely popular during his own lifetime. Queen Victoria herself was an admirer of Dickens' work. We also have to note here that the Victorian period divided into two parts. From 1848 to 1860, it was called as a pre-Raphaelites, and from 1880 to 1901 as an aestheticism and decadency. In literature, the name of this period was called as the Age of Tennyson and Age of Hardy. Okay, the next period of English literature is Edwardian period, the span where the Victorian period ended and the World War first began, marked the reign of King Edward. This was the period where Thomas Hardy gave up on writing novels for the love of poetry and William Butler Yeats and Rudyard Kipling made a name of their own in the field of poetry. Another coveted and well-established playwright was Henry James, who published his novels in the Edwardian era. These were the Wings of the Dove, the Ambassadors, and the Golden Bough. The beginning of the 20th century is called the Edwardian period, and it is a short but intense period full of changes in all fields of life. Progress was making flying possible for us. The forms were passed to improve people's lives. Ireland wants to home rule while abroad the United States and Germany Canaan are growing steadily so, while some people are fighting for their rights and sacrifice their lives in the name of freedom and equality, the British Empire is still expanding, and for many British citizens' life is still deeply rooted in the reassuring traditions which they thought had made Britain great all over the world until the situation comes to its breaking point. The breaking point was the World War I that breaks out in 1914. Edward became king in 1901, and the liberal government of Herbert Henry continued on the path of social reforms already started in the Victorian age, for example in 1908 old age. So the war poets wrote about the horror of the trench warfare. W.B. Yeats reminded us of the Easter Rising in his poem Easter, 1916, and modernist writers such as Virginia Woolf, James Joyce, and Eliot described the legacy of war in their lives and in the world. From 1910 to 1936, it was a time of Georgian period. So Georgian period, called Georgian after the name of George V, who reigned over England during these years. It is the second phase of modern age. However, literary features of the modern age continued till 1939, the year in which the Second World War broke out. For this reason, it is generally agreed that the modern age ended in 1939. Georgian period saw a group of writers denoted as Georgian poets, who focused on rural subjects that were delicate to handle. They were subjects that were not regarded as bold and too fierce in nature. So Georgian poetry were composed in the traditional mode. The best work of the Georgian poets appeared in the period just before during the immediately after the First World War. Raper Broke, Edmund Blunden, Walter de la Mare, and also the war poets Siegfried Sasson, Isaac Rosenberg, and Wilfred Owen belong to this group. Unlike the symbolist poets Arthur Symons and Yeats, Georgian poets feel back to their native roots. Georgian poetry is noted for its minute observation of flora and fauna without any intellectual comment on them in the portrayal of human life. Okay, the next period in our list is modern period. When we talk about modern period, we have also to talk about the postmodern one. Modernism and postmodernism are terms that have undergone relative change in the recent past. The modern poets include Yeats, Auden, Eliot, Kafka, amongst the many notable poets and authors. Modern period of English literature was marked by a new style, format, mise en scène, concept, and relative features of the subjects in question. Virginia Woolf's A Stream of Thought, writer Jacob's Room, and James Joyce's Ulysses were monotone narratives that signified the rapidity with which innovation in poetry occurred. Postmodernism is an era in which the individual has to look beyond the obvious, draw parallels with reality, with absurdity and overt projection of sexuality has been made prominent. Postmodernism marks Narayan, Anita Desai, Salman Rushdie, Arundhati Roy as writers who have their very own signature post-colonial ways of writing and projecting their thought in their unique ways. So we have finished it with the periods of literature. Okay, let's talk about Old English poetry. Old English poetry is of two types: the heroic, Germanic, pre-Christian, and the Christian. It has survived for the most part in 4 manuscripts, also known as the Caedmon manuscript, which is an illustrated poetic anthology. The second manuscript is called the Exeter Book, also an anthology located in the Exeter Cathedral since it was donated there in the 11th century. The third manuscript is called the Vercelli Book, a mix of poetry and prose. How it came to be in Vercelli, Italy, no one knows, and is a matter of debate. The fourth manuscript is called the Novel Codex, also a mixture of poetry and prose. Old English poetry had no noun rules or system left to us by the Anglo-Saxons. Everything we know about it is based on modern analysis. The first widely accepted theory was by Edward Sivers in 1885, in which he distinguished 5 distinct alliterative patterns. The theory of John Pope in 1942 uses musical notations, which has had some acceptance. Every few years a new theory arises and the topic continues to be hotly debated. Most Old English poets are anonymous. 12 are known by name from medieval sources, but only 4 of those are known by their vernacular works to us today with any certainty. They are Caedmon, Bede, Alfred, and Cynewulf. Of these, only Caedmon, Bede, and Alfred have known biographies. Caedmon is the best known and considered the father of Old English poetry. He lived at the Abbey of Whitby in Northumbria in the 7th century. Only a single 9-line poem remains, called Hymn, which is also the oldest surviving text in English. Even though the English literature begins with the Beowulf, it is England's heroic epic, the proper beginning for national literature, but it belongs to everyone because it is profoundly human. The poem shapes and interprets materials connected with the tribes from northern Europe, the Angles, Saxons, and Jutes, who invaded England after the Romans left in the 5th century. The tribal history is in the poem. It is remote, even monstrous, and yet familiar, keeping the bloody alive and paying the living for one crime only with another. It is a history of festering pride, loud talk, and drunken violence, of spies, bloody borders, and raids. But against this dark background, the poem presents another kind of history. It is history in which a stranger comes openly to help rather than cowardly to kill and loot, in which eating and drinking and speaking and gift-giving are natural ceremonies uniting young and old, in which heroic strength is wise and generous. It is a history of ideal possibilities. The only surviving manuscript of Beowulf dates from around 1000, but the work itself was probably composed at some time during the 8th century. The poem, which recounts the exploits of 3rd or 4th century Geats and Danes, is doubtless based on earlier unwritten stories that had been passed from generation to generation by word of mouth. The Anglo-Saxons of Britain shared a common group of heroes with other Germanic peoples, and the hero Beowulf certainly has his origins in an early pagan era. The author of written version that has come down to us seems to have been a Christian. The language of this version is Old English. The translation you will read in modern English is by the poet Burton Raphael. Beowulf, like all epic poems, is about a hero who is leader of his people. The action is extraordinary, the hero larger than life, the diction is stately, and many of its scenes, the banquet, the battle, the boast, the voyage, and the funeral, are tradition. The general tone of the poem is somber, owing to a vision of evil in the world, a belief in the power of fate. The genre of the literature of that period is epic. Epic is a long narrative poem ordinarily concerning a serious subject containing details of heroic deeds. Old English period was also marked by the beginning of the English prose. Canning, one of the type of English prose of that period, is elaborating phrase that describes persons, things, or events in a metaphorical, indirect way. Example: Wales, home, the sea. Bede, the Venerable, was the earliest historian of England and the earliest important prose writer. He was a contemporary of the unknown author of Beowulf. Bede, who was a monk, was known in his own day as a man of great scholarship and learning. His books were read and copied all over Europe. The title Venerable was added to his name in recognition of his reputation for wisdom, humility, and scholarship. He seems to have traveled little and spent most of his life, beginning at the age of 7 at the monastery of Jarrow. Bede is also considered to be the father of the English history. Bede's History of the English Church and People was originally written in Latin. However, the translation into Old English undertaken in the reign of King Alfred the Great became a classic and helped the people of the emerging English nation to take pride in their past. The history itself is more than a chronicle of events. It also contains legends, lives of saints, local traditions, and stories.